Gentlemen of the press, the Monetary Policy Committee, MPC, of the Central Bank of Nigeria, CBN, held its 296th meeting on the 22nd and 23rd of July 2024 to review recent economic and financial developments, as well as assess risks to the outlook. 11 members attended the meeting. Decisions of the MPC. The committee's decisions are as follows. 1. Raise the NPR by 50 basis points to 27.65% from 26.25%. Adjusted the asymmetric corridor around the NPR from plus 100 to minus 300 to plus 500 to minus 100 basis points. Retain the cash reserve ratio of deposit money banks at 45% and merchant banks at 14%. Retain the liquidity ratio at 30%. Considerations. The committee was mindful of the effect of rising prices on households and businesses and expressed its resolve to take necessary measures to bring inflation under control. It re-emphasized its commitment to the bank's price stability mandate and remained optimistic that despite the June 2024 uptick in headline inflation, prices are expected to moderate in the near term. This is hinged on monetary policy gaining further traction in addition to recent measures by the fiscal authority to address food inflation. In its consideration, the committee noted the persistence of food inflation, which continues to undermine price stability. It was observed that while monetary policy has been moderating aggregate demand, rising food and energy costs continue to exert upward pressure on price development. The prevailing insecurity in food producing areas and high cost of transportation of farm produce are also contributing to this trend. Members were therefore not oblivious to the urgent benefit of addressing these challenges, as it will offer a sustainable solution to the persistent pressure on food prices. Also noted in its consideration is the increasing activities of middlemen who often finance smallholder farmers, aggregate, hoard, and move farm produce across the border to neighboring countries. The committee suggested the need to put in check such activities in order to address the food supply deficit in the Nigerian market to moderate food prices. The MPC therefore resolved to sustain collaboration with the fiscal authority to ensure that inflationary pressure is subdued. In addition, the committee expressed optimism with the recent stopgap measures by the federal government to bridge the food supply deficit. In particular, The 150-day duty-free import window for food commodities, maize, horse brown rice, wheat, and cowpeas, amongst others, will moderate domestic food prices. It is noteworthy that these measures will not lead to direct injection of liquidity into the economy as to cause further inflation. While the measure is a welcome development and may prove effective in the short run, it is expedient that it is implemented with a defined exit strategy to avert a possible rollback of the recent gains in domestic food production. To support these initiatives, the bank is already engaging development finance institutions like the Bank of Industry, BOI, to ensure adequate support to industries with a focus on small and medium-scale enterprises, SMEs. The MPC noted the narrowing spread between the various foreign exchange segments of the market, an indication of price discovery and improved market efficiency, thus reducing opportunities for arbitrage and speculation. The committee noted that the increase in the level of external reserves would further build confidence for a more stable exchange rate and thus urge the bank to explore available avenues to improve inflows, especially through diaspora remittances. In addition, members noted the efforts of the federal government and private sector towards improving domestic refining capacity, as this is expected to reduce foreign exchange currently being expended on the importation of refined petroleum products. The NPC noted the sustained resilience of the banking system, reflected in improvements of key financial soundness indicators. Members further encouraged the continued need for close monitoring of the system as the implementation of the recapitalization exercise progresses. To consolidate on the gains thus far achieved, the committee re-emphasized its commitment to stay on course with its tightening cycle in view of the urgent need to address inflationary pressures. Key developments in the domestic and global economies. According to the National Bureau of Statistics, domestic headline inflation rose marginally to 34.19% in June 2024 from 33.95% in May 2024, driven by the continued rise in the year-on-year components of food and core inflation. Similarly, month-on-month headline inflation rose to 2.31% in June 2024 from 2.14% in the preceding month. The food and core components rose to 2.55 and 2.06% in June 2024 from 2.28 and 2.01% in May, respectively. Real GDP year-on-year grew by 2.98% in the first quarter of 2024, compared with 3.46% in the fourth quarter of 2023, driven by both the oil and non-oil sectors. Staff forecasts, however, suggest that the domestic economy will grow by 3.38% in 2024, while the IMF has projected growth at 3.1% in 2024. As of July 18, 2024, external reserves stood at $37.05 billion, compared with $34.70 billion as at the end of June 2024. This represents 11 months of import goods and services cover. The global economy, according to the IMF, is forecast to grow at 3.2% and 3.3% in 2024 and 2025, respectively. Headwinds to the global projection remain the tight global financial conditions and ongoing geographical tensions associated with the wars in Gaza and Ukraine, both of which have significant impact on commodity prices and the global supply chain. Global inflation is forecast to continue to decelerate marginally in 2024, but may stay above the long-run objectives of most advanced economy central banks. Global financial conditions may, therefore, remain broadly tight through 2024 and into 2025. The committee reaffirmed its commitment to continue to monitor developments in the global and domestic economies, to guide policy and ensure that inflation expectations are adequately anchored. The next meeting of the committee will be held on the 23rd and 24th of September 2024. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Governor, sir. That was communique number 143, presented by the MPC and the Governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria, Mr. Olayemi Kadusu. We will now take questions from the members of the press. Remember to state your name, your medium, and you ask your question. You are entitled to just a question. Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon, Mr. Governor, members of the MPC, I am Nancy Naji, the anchor money and the Nancy Onianti. Mr. Governor, I think mine is pretty simple, but I will start by asking you to reiterate the rates again, because it seems we were a bit lost we didn't get those rates, so please do that. The simple question to you really is, you had a forum recently in Lagos, and there you reiterated as a policymaker a commitment to getting average Nigerians on the streets, solving their problems. But Mr. Governor, we are also on the streets, and many Nigerians are really, that average Nigerian you mentioned, are really now severely hurting from the impacts of inflation. So my question to you is, Nigerians also are questioning and are skeptical about the measures that the central bank is taking is not, we need to really address the issue and also fix the problem. So, Mr. Governor, for those watching now, for those listening, I would like you to, perhaps tell Nigerians why this is still. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nancy. Again, let me just reiterate the committee's decisions on the rates. The committee's decisions are as follows. Raise the MPR by 50 basis points to 26.75% from 26.25%. From 26.75% from 26.25%. Adjusted the asymmetric corridor around the MPR from plus 100 to minus 300 to plus 500 to 100 basis points. Retain the cash reserve ratio of deposit money banks at 45% and merchant banks at 14%, and retain the liquidity ratio at 30%. Okay, now to your question, which is a very valid question, and I think you're probably referring to an earlier submission. I think it was probably at a business day seminar, I believe, where I said, and really I merely reiterated a position I've always held on to, and that is that as policymakers, indeed specifically as financial and economic policy makers, it is very important that we bear in mind the impact of our policies on the man on the street, on the average man on the street. And why did I say this? Because many times as people in finance, economics, some could be criticized for living in a bubble and being completely disconnected with what happens outside. And from my perspective as a policymaker, that is a failure. Ultimately, if we're doing all the things we're doing and we're not able to impact the man on the street, ultimately, then what do we really say we've been doing? And I think sometimes when people look at figures too often, they may lose track of that. And that is why I said what I said, that it is so important that we continue to bear that in mind, that our policies must ultimately impact the man on the street. I hear you about the issues you've referred to, Nancy, but I think to adequately address that, it's maybe important to cast our minds back, okay, and ask ourselves, how did we get to where we are today? Okay, how did we get to where we are today? How did we get to a position where the central bank is using the policies that you say you are wondering whether they are having their impact? Now, let's not forget that over a period of time, we've had an economy and have failed to diversify that economy. We would argue that the Nigerian economy has basically been a monolithic one in which we've more or less depended on one source of revenue. Now, of course, a monolithic economy has its own risks. And part of those risks, of course, is that if anything happens to your dependency, then the whole system gets shaken. And I guess in many respects, that's part of what we're going through. Part of it, it's not all, it's certainly part of it. Because let's not forget there are global headwinds as well. So it's part of it. And that going forward, we must ensure that we are able to craft policies that are sustainable, okay, and will bring a sustainable method of development for our people. There's no point in policies that are ad hoc and don't really take us to where we want to get to in the long term. Because in the business of policy crafting, we must have the long term in view. You don't have the long term in view, you end up paying for it later. So that's where I was coming from. And that such policies, of course, must take into consideration inclusiveness. And that is why at the central bank, the issue of financial inclusion has been an area of great focus. And then, of course, it's not just to talk about the policies alone, but the implementing process must be equally robust. And that is where the issue of institutions and strengthening institutions is relevant. No matter the policies you craft, if the institutions are not there to support those policies, then you will suboptimize. And again, from the central bank's perspective, that is very, very important. It is very key. Now, these things have to go hand in hand. There's no issue of, doing one and expecting the other to follow. They have to go hand in hand, the crafting of the policies, the implementing of the policies. And of course, we also have to bear in mind that in the process, given the background I've just mentioned, some of these things, of course, have been with us over a period of time, with the result that the economy has suboptimized. So in the short term, we may find that some of the policies being implemented may appear stringent, but I can assure you that into the medium and to the long term, definitely they will put us on the path of sustainability, which is important, please. It is very important, and that's why I made reference to it. We must focus on sustainable development. We are also finding, and I think this will become more apparent with time, that our policies are beginning to cascade down and up because there's a period for transition mechanisms to have impact. But we find that gradually they are beginning to turn a negative corner. Okay, bit by bit, it's moving in a relatively more positive trajectory. We will continue to ensure that, like I said earlier on, the process of implementing policies are those that we are very vigilant on, and that we ensure that those who play in the area that we supervise play by the rules, because that's also very, very, very important.
Good afternoon, Mr. Governor. My name is Isaac Wahab. I write from Telegraph Newspapers. As you rightly noted, inflation is still trending 34.19% in June. What is the bank assessment of this impact on the households and the monetary power, and what's being done by the bank to stabilize the economy?
Thank you very much, Musa. Clearly, two areas that pose a challenge. One is in the area of food inflation, which we all know is been a bit of a challenge. And the other, of course, is in the area of foreign exchange and its own pass-through. Now, with respect to food, I would say that, and we said it in the MPC communique, that we notice the moves by the fiscal side to help taking on certain policies that are helping to moderate food inflation, and we very much are encouraged by that. So we are hopeful. Don't forget that a while back we also made a donation of fertilizer, which was also given in with the view to help the situation going forward. On the On the foreign exchange side, because we all accept the fact that the foreign exchange pass-through is very significant. And I'm happy to say that we have seen positive outcomes from the tools that we have been using over the recent past. For example, exchange rate has converged, limiting the opportunities for arbitrage, which is very important. Inflows have increased from 37.93% between January and May 2024 to 38.8%, I beg your pardon, to 38.8 billion. And net inflows, more importantly, actually, grew by 73.4% May 2024, comparing this to May 2023. So that's very good news. And something I speak about all the time on the issue of diaspora remittances. And I'm very pleased to say that as at end of June, this had gone up to $2.34 billion in comparison to $1.58 billion for the corresponding period last year. Capital importation, again, between January and June, $5.92 billion relative to $1.77 billion for the corresponding period last year. So that's all very positive, okay, for foreign exchange management. We've also seen that on the capital markets, policies are having the capital markets responding positively. And of course, the banking sector, we've been very aggressive in giving guidance to the banks with respect to how we want them to position themselves for the future of the $1 trillion economy. Inflation targeting is something that is an ongoing process and which will be giving more and more guidance as we go along.
Good afternoon, Mr. Abba. I am James Ibedo with CITE. The real sector players are really, having the heat over the continuous hiking interest rate. They have been complaining. I want to ask, sir, are you having any engagement with them in order to, make them see why this is so? Because the way it is now, some of them are even saying that their jobs are threatened and all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, James. Yeah, the straight answer to your question is yes, we are engaging with them. We've had a number of different fora with them, both in some cases individually and in many cases collectively. And it's something that we will continue to do so to at least explain the reasons why we are taking some of the measures we are taking. However, I think I'll just say one or two things. One is to understand, and these are some of the things that we discuss with the organized private sector, that inflation really and truly is having a major impact on our economy. Purchasing power is getting eroded. People are being pushed into different categories of poverty, and it is in their own interest that we are able to tame the scourge of inflation. If not, the ramifications will also be for them. It's not on the average man alone. It will also be for them. And we understand the need for growth, and we also understand that it is relatively challenging when you have high interest rates. We also understand that. And quite frankly, my belief is that it is so fundamental to the long-term future and stability of our economy that inflation should be brought under control. That in the short term, these are pains which ultimately will be able to help our economy and help the manufacturing businesses as well. However, it's also important to reflect on how we got to where we are, okay? And let's not forget that this was largely as a result of a tremendous amount of liquidity that came into the system in a relatively short space of time, Okay, when you print money on Ways and Means, it has its consequences, and we are paying for those consequences right now, unfortunately. Unfortunately, we all witness a situation where money's supply trajectory got out of hand, and it is, the response to this that interest rates have gotten to where they are in a bid to manage that money supply better and to ensure that things do not spike out of control.
The governor, members of the MPC. My name is Sunday Michael Ogo. I write for the Daily Trust newspaper. It's been 4 months since the commencement of the recapitalization exercise out of the 24 months period we are looking at. I would like you to give us a better view of how that whole process is coming. Thank you.
Thank you, Sunday. Let me just correct you, because this is a common. What you just said is a pretty common view, but it is much more than 4 months. You recall that in November of last year at the Chartered Institute of Bankers Forum, I actually did say that we were going to get the banks to recapitalize. I did say that at the time. And that was a very clear signal to the banking industry as to where we are going to go to. Since that time, of course, I think it was March, April, where, the specific numbers were given up, but we are giving more than enough time for the banks to begin the process of putting that in order. And I must also stress to you, Sunday, that unlike many policies that stakeholders may be used to in Nigeria, in this particular case, we've given adequate time, 2 years. So we're telling the banks, don't be in a rush, take your time and ensure that over a 2-year period, you comply with this directive. Okay, so it is considering the importance of this thing and ensuring that we do not push the banks into any kind of stress other than to eventually get to where they should be getting to, especially considering the foreign exchange devaluations and other things, and also giving them enough buffers to absorb shocks. Now, in terms of where do we stand? Well, so far so good. Those who are going out to the market to raise money have begun the process of doing so, and also those who are reporting back to us as to how they are going to do their private raises are also doing the same. So far so good.
Good afternoon, Mr. Governor and members of the MPC committee. My name is Sarah Chibobu, Channels TV. Just to find out what informed your recent policy on dormant accounts, there's been a mixed reaction in the public space. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Okay, now I think, but I can't be sure, that perhaps some of the mixed reaction could have come from the lack of or misunderstanding between dormant and domiciliary. Okay, this particular directive is with respect to dormant accounts, not domiciliary accounts, dormant accounts. Now, I don't know about you, but over the years, in my experience, what I found personally is that if you leave accounts dormant in banks, sometimes more than when you don't leave them dormant in banks. In fact, most times they are more susceptible to fraudsters copying your identity and trying to game the system to grab hold of your money. Okay, so that is a problem that I think most money banks face. And I'm sure if you've been on the receiving end, I have been, then you know that anything that can protect you in the process from these kinds of predators will be welcome. The policy and the directive is meant to ensure that all those monies come to the central bank for safekeeping. You don't lose your money. You don't lose your money. And it's at zero cost to the beneficiaries. All that will happen is that the central bank will manage the monies within our possession. And when the rightful owner surfaces, the money is returned plus whatever income is accrued to you. And I think this should be a welcome development, even from the naysayers, because at a time like this, we recognize the fact that everybody needs every single penny that belongs to them to accrue to them, and not have a situation where you're putting money in a particular place and essentially end up losing it. Of course, it will create liquidity within the system as well.
Thank you so much, Mr. Governor. I have a question from Zaka Hali, Leadership Newspapers, and I'd like to ask the question on his behalf. He said, Mr. Governor, the common man is suffering. From your vantage point as Governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria, what is your perspective on the outlook of the Nigerian economy? Thank you.
Thank you very much to Zaka. Thank you for that question, which is a very valid question and one that we should all be concerned about. Where is this all going to? Especially in an environment where we see that inflation, as we've witnessed today, is, it's still there with us. However, much as inflation is a challenge, we are also seeing some cooling down in inflation. We are seeing some cooling down in inflation. And we expect that as time goes along, that will continue. That will continue and result in a positive trajectory eventually. Again, foreign exchange continues to be a challenge, but I think I've mentioned that we are seeing positive results from the very, very hard work that the central bank has embarked upon over the recent months. Some very, very positive outcomes. I've spoken about the fact that our reserves are being boosted and that relative to last year, we're seeing greater velocity and more inflows coming in, which essentially, in my view, is a question of building back trust and restoring credibility. Because I want to say something here, Zaka. No matter what we do in terms of policies, if we don't have trust and we don't bring back credibility, all those policies will come to very little. So I'm very pleased that at least in terms of the trust deficit that we have had, we are slowly but surely beginning to rise out of it. How do I know this? Apart from the numbers that I've reeled out today, it is also a reflection of what those who make it their business to follow the developments of banks, central banks, world economies are all coming out to say, yes, central bank is on the right trajectory and the Nigerian economy is on the right trajectory. I'll be concerned if that wasn't the case. I'll be very, very, very concerned if we found ourselves going on the opposite direction in terms of the different macroeconomic policies. Some of the other things, debt to GDP, tax to GDP, those are all things that are being fixed from the fiscal side, and we see the efforts that are being made, which both the fiscal and the monetary collaborate. I'm convinced that barring any unforeseen circumstances, and I must say, in saying this, I must also say that CBN extra vigilant. We will not go to sleep on our responsibilities. We will not. But to emphasize that the collaboration between the fiscal and the monetary side, continuing in the way and strengthening the handshake across both sides is, I'm confident, will take us to a much, much better place where the building blocks will be there and the growth which the organized private sector rightly talk about, they'll find they will have a solid foundation on which to grow the economy of this country. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Governor, sir. Members of the press, this brings to conclusion the press briefing for today. Thank you very much for coming, and see you in September. Thank you.
Thank you. I hope I clarified it properly.